Okay, so as all of you know, Tasting Nitch has put out a video of her frequently asked beer questions, and she's tagged a bunch of people to go ahead and answer the same questions and put those out and tag some people at the end. And it's gone around in the circles, and now it's stretched over from the beer tubing community over into the brew tubing community. And I have been tagged by both Sammy the Thrifty Brewer and the Canadian Sasquatch. So I thank you guys. I'm at the cabin this weekend. We're here celebrating Easter weekend. Always at the cabin for this holiday. Beautiful views, having some great weather. Let's go ahead and show you around a little bit. It's kind of nice out here, so let's go ahead and talk about these frequently asked beer questions, and yeah, let's go for a walk in the woods. From the cabin up to this little trail up here, and then you get to see the sides of me that you don't ever see really. And this will be our nice little outhouse up here slash storage. Not that, you know, you want to see where I take a shit or anything, but kind of a more interesting shot of it. Overlooking the lake over there. It's quite nice. Alright, moving on. Okay, so the first question, how did I get into beer geeking and why beer? It wasn't always so. You know, there was a period where actually I didn't even want to drink any beer, and believe it or not, that's when I was in the military, when I was overseas in Italy. But back that up a little bit, I was stationed in San Francisco in a little base called Alameda, right across the bay from San Francisco. And I actually first started getting into beer then. I think I was 22, 23 years old. And I had a buddy of mine, Ray. We were, yeah, this was about 1995, 1996 area when I first moved there. And we used to go to Oakland almost every night. We would go to Oakland and we'd have stouts, and we'd have wheat beers, Hefeweizens, red ales, all sorts of things that you wouldn't be able to find like in any store back then. It was like Oakley was the place to go if you wanted craft beer. We didn't really call it craft beer back then. It was just good beer, you know, instead of the piss water else that you would drink elsewhere. So that was sort of my first instep into craft beer. Yeah, about 95, 96 would be about the time frame in Oakley. In 98, I got transferred out of there off that ship, and I went to Italy. So in Italy, it became wine. In Italy, wine became my thing because that's what was readily available. And it was me as a young 24, 25-year-old trying to become more sophisticated in this world. Did that ever really happen? No, not at all. In Italy, the attachment I was attached to, you know, I had some good officers that were very good influences on me earlier on. But the last couple years that I was there, the attachment had a drunk. He was an alcoholic for a commanding officer, and that was not a good experience, and so I really didn't want anything to do with alcohol at that point. It took a very long time in order for me to get over that experience. So I ended up, because of him, at the 9-year mark, I decided that I'd had enough and didn't want another experience like that again. So I got out, and I'd already been dating my wife at the time, doing a long-distance relationship between Italy and Norway. And I figured, well, you know, I really wanted to start a family, and I was in love, and so I got out and moved on. So I moved in 2002 to Norway, and in the hopes of getting married with my wife and starting a life. I was there 3 months, proposed to her, she said yes, but I didn't have any way to stay there. I didn't have a job, I didn't have a visa, I didn't have, you know, any legality way in order to stay there. So I had to go back to the States and you know, find work as a civilian. So that was kind of an interesting transition. I moved to San Diego. I had done a lot of work with some military contractors while I was in Italy, and I started working for one in San Diego. I was in Poway, actually, living in Poway, working in Poway. Little did I know at the time that I was in the mecca of craft beer movement back then, 2002, 2003 to early 2004. You know, beer wasn't part of my life back then. It was still wine. You know, I had a wine rack and I'd enjoy a glass of wine with dinner, whatever the occasion. And yeah, that was my life back then. 2004, my wife and I got married in February, Valentine's Day, in a little Norwegian seaman's chapel in LA. And that was cool. So I ended up moving back to Norway in May of that year, and was still working as a consultant for that same firm in San Diego, yeah, from afar. So came back to Norway and yeah, started living. And back then, even back then, I wasn't drinking hardly anything, no beers or anything like that. It wasn't until we had children. They became 3 years old, and we decided to get out of the city, buy a house out in the country, and it was then I started getting into beer. As a homeowner with neighbors in a nice neighborhood, I was thinking, you know, I was dreaming really about, you know, living the dream and always having some beer in the fridge so that when your neighbors came over to visit with you, you know, you do the most obvious thing and offer them a beer, sit back, relax, and just shoot the shit. So I started looking into beer back then, and of course you go down into the stores, and we're talking, it was about 2009. The only thing in the stores back then at that time was typical 15 different variations of the same style of beer. Slight variations in the spring, in the summer, and in the fall, but pretty much all Pilsners. So I looked into on YouTube, like everybody else says, and says, you know, how to make beer. And lo and behold, a whole buttload of videos on how to make beer. So I said, well, let's go ahead and give this a try. So I went and picked up a beer kit at one of my local stores. For like 30 bucks, you get a can of kit, the bucket, and some extra sugar and whatever else you needed. Had to buy a hydrometer and all that other stuff. So I went home and brewed up my first kit beer. It was a Gordy's Lager. I don't know if anybody else has ever tried that one, but I figured it was a nice way to get going. And I did pretty much everything standard. When it came to the sugar, instead of using sugar, I didn't use table sugar. Instead, I used powdered sugar at the time. You know, the stuff that you usually put on pastries. It actually turned out really good. It turned out tasting like a Corona that you had already put the lime into it. And it was interesting because only like months later, the more and more I got into the brew tubing community, you know, you often hear people talk about the twang that's in the extract beer kits that you get. And I guess if I look back on it, that sort of, with the lime taste already in it, that probably was contributed by that kit twang. So as I alluded to, that beer actually tasted really, really good. And yeah, that's when I got hooked. That's when I noticed it was time to build an all grain system, get into all grain, and for the next year I brewed more kits, trying to perfect my process, while all the while building a electric brewery. So the second question, what is my favorite beer? And I'll be honest with you, there's a lot of very good beers out there, and I'm not trying to toot my own horn, but probably my favorite beer is one that I brewed called Monterey Street. This is one that I heard about from the guys on the Brewing Network. They came on and they did an interview, and they talked about their award-winning beer from the Great American Beer Festival last year, I believe, 2016. And it was called Monterey Street in the States, and it's a pale ale, very easy drinking beer that uses Mosaic and Galaxy hops in it, and that beer just sort of rocked my world. When I tasted it, I just knew, I mean, that was like a great combination of fruity and tropical, and yeah, that's probably my favorite one. Commercial beers, I was in San Diego not too long ago, and I had a chance to get a fresh bottle of Stone's Tangerine IPA, Tangerine Express, and that was phenomenal as well. That was really, really good. Kind of makes me want to try a tangerine IPA. That would be right up there. So if I could have just one beer for the rest of my life, what beer would it be? I would think I would want something simple. Give me a typical blonde ale. Something that is easy on the palate, easy drinking, and yeah, IPAs and pale ales, I mean, those are kind of really, really nice a lot of the time, most of the time, for my tastes. The thing is that after you have a couple of them, you know, they have a tendency to lay on some palate fatigue, and in order to avoid that, I would suspect, you know, I would want something a little bit easier, like a blonde ale. And if I'm on this island, let's call it Gilligan's Island, because, you know, let's face it, nobody wants to be on a desert island, even though you know, you want some nice sandy beaches and stuff. Gilligan's Island probably provides certain things that you could sort of, you know, add to this beer. And I think a blonde ale is a great base if you want to add things to it, like shredded coconut, for example, vanilla beans, oranges, lemons, whatever that you could find on Gilligan's Island, I'm sure could complement this blonde ale in some way, shape, or form. Blonde ale. Alright, so how do I drink so much and how do I stay healthy? First and foremost, I don't drink so much. That's pretty much key number one. Staying healthy, you know, I eat right and I work out. It wasn't always that so. It wasn't always that way. It wasn't always so. 2 years ago, I weighed 107 kilos, which was quite a bit. I can throw up a video here to sort of, I can throw up a picture here to kind of show you. It's changed dramatically over the last 2 years. So consistently remaining active and eating right, definitely, without a doubt. I only drink on the weekends, Saturday and Sunday mostly. The occasional Sunday drink if I'm doing a homebrew Wednesday. That'll usually end up on a Saturday or a Sunday. So yeah, that's what I do. So when it comes to working out and the cardio aspect of it, from what I've read, and what seems to work for me is that, you know, your body doesn't even start to burn the fat reserves that you have until at least 30 minutes into it. So I'll generally go for 45 minutes to about 50 minutes when I'm doing cardio, and just to sort of make sure that I'm burning into those reserves and getting the maximum amount of effort or effect for the effort. When it comes to weight training, which I'll switch on and off, so like Monday, Wednesday, Friday is weight training, Tuesdays and Thursdays is cardio. When it comes to weight training, you know, that's probably twice as long, because then, you know, it only takes you about 15 to 20 seconds to do a set of, you know, 10 to 15 reps. So, and then you're waiting around for a minute to do the next set. So it takes a little bit longer, I think, in terms of, you know, the effect from the effort. So that generally lasts me about a good hour and a half. Yeah, and that's what I do for training. Towards the question, am I an alcoholic? Definitely not. I'm fully aware that it does run in both my parents' families, and you know, it's just something to be aware of and monitor and conscious of, really. So with that awareness, you know, I stay pretty much true to myself and only consume what I think is socially acceptable, social drinking on Saturdays and Sundays, and of course ample amount of water in between is a given. So I ran across a couple branches. They're actually all around me here. These are juniper trees or branches. You can see the little berries on them up here. So they're pretty much all around the cabin. You can find them all over the place. Those are a very interesting thing to add as an ingredient into your beer. But, so what is my favorite ingredient? Without a doubt, yeast. Yeast is number one because, you know, we've cataloged, you know, hundreds, maybe even a few thousand varieties of yeast in the brewing world culture, and they're being discovered all the time. In the air, there are just so many that we haven't yet even fully realized, I think, and only have domesticated, you know, a handful in different regions, and I think that there's a lot of more potential there. There are flavors out there that the yeast produce as a catalyst for all sorts of compounds. I think the best tasting beers come from the best producing yeasts, but maybe we have not yet even discovered the best and most flavorful ones that are out there. So yeah, that's wishful thinking, but could be true. So with the question, do I brew? Yeah, I brew. I try and brew at least monthly. It keeps me interested in brewing. So what was my first beer? And I'm kind of reminded when I was young, like 10 years old, 12 years old, something like that. We'd go up to my grandparents' house, and all the boys, you know, my grandfather and all his friends would be out in his shack called the Rat Shack, and that was always kind of interesting. They'd be out there drinking beers, and probably the most common beer back then I would say was Genesee. Genesee was pretty prominent, and it was definitely with the pull tabs on it, not like the tabs are today, but it was the pull tabs, the stickers, and that was kind of interesting. I remember, yeah, I would sneak like a sip here and there. I'd like to sip on the suds that would start to foam out, and then hand it off to my grandfather. That was kind of interesting. Later on, when I was actually growing up and a teenager and trying to just have fun with my buddies, you know, we'd sneak away and camp in the woods. And back then, yeah, we'd do like everybody else, you know, you'd grab the cheapest beer that you could find in the store. And back then it was Old Milwaukee. Old Milwaukee, oh boy. There's some times there. So who inspires me in terms of the most in the brewing community? Who's the inspiration, or who do I look up to? And before I ever knew people like Charlie Papazian or Sam Calagione or John Palmer or Jamil Zainasheff or any of those guys, before I knew them, I knew other brew tubers. Back at the time, of course, you know, you can't get away without mentioning S.J. Poor, Dan ABA, Maine Brew Guy, Stephen Tate, Hokie Homebrew, even Hockey Player back then was a pretty influential brew tuber that influenced on my choices and direction and the things that I did. So those were big influences. Nowadays it is more about the guys who write for the brewing series of books like Yeast, Malt, Hops, and the Chris Whites of the world, the Jamil Zainashevs, John Palmer, of course. All these guys that are doing research, Stan, I forget Stan's last name, the guy who wrote Hops. All the guys that are doing the research, the science aspect of brewing, because that's really where I think most of the strides are in terms of learning things. But then again, there's also the art side of brewing, which is all personal to each and every individual home brewer. We're all going to put our unique spins on how we interpret what we learn from the guys that are actually doing the science and the research. And so yeah, those are my main influences these days and who I look up to. It probably doesn't need to be said, but I'm going to say it anyways. That also includes all the guys that are over on Milk the Funk, that are pushing the boundaries. All those guys that are doing research into microbiology, organic biochemistry. That's very interesting stuff. I've always been sort of better at science, sciencey sort of things, and that's really what stirs my attention these days. And yeah, that's where I'm at. When am I gonna brew a sour beer? Well, I'm building up culture and some dregs as we speak, so it's definitely gonna start in 2017. And yeah, I'll include more about that in some Homebrew Wednesday videos later on this year. So then it becomes time to tag some people. People I would like to hear answer these same questions. I was going to mention, I thought about this for a little while, and I was going to mention the Brewed Palate, but I see that he's already put a video out. I was going to mention Main Brew Guy, but I see that somebody's already mentioned him. Same with Dan ABA and a whole bunch of others. So I'm going to go ahead and nominate a couple of people I haven't thought about for a while. Somebody else I've talked to recently, and we'll see who else comes out of my head here in a second. But first and foremost, I want to hear these questions answered by another BrewTuber who went pro, Stephen Tate. Hat trick. If you can go ahead and answer these questions, that would be fantastic. Let's see, who else? Hey, you know what? Where's Hockey Player Ben? Where you been, man? Come on, answer these questions. Become part of the club. You've been tagged, man. Steven is Steven. Who else? I know somebody has already mentioned Hokey Homebrew, so hopefully he comes out of the woodwork. You know what? Let's go out on a limb. I don't know if he'll do it or not, but let's hit up CraigTube. CraigTube, why don't you go ahead and come forward and be part of Tasting Nitch's frequently asked beer questions. I mean, you get asked questions all the time. Let's go ahead and see you answer some of these. Okay, so Hapless Ginger Beer or Hapless Ginger Brew. Let's go ahead and see you answer the frequently asked beer questions. Also, Three's a Crowd Brewing. I don't think that he's been tagged yet, although he has been busy just opening up his brew pub. So how about you two guys? I'd like to see something from you. So, there you go, guys. You've been tagged. Hopefully you'll step up to the plate, put out a video. Looking forward to seeing it. And thanks a lot, Tasting Nitch, for starting this chain video out there, putting it out there, and asking everyone to participate. Pretty fun. Anyways, take care, guys. Cheers.